Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another episode of PEM Rules, the Pediatric Emergency Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Yaron Ivan, as usual. And today, two very important, very special guests. Both of them have been an instrumental part of my training, my knowledge, and my experience as a Pediatric Emergency Medicine Fellow, now attending. Today, I'm going to be talking to Mel and Noel, who were both part of my fellowship. At the time when I was a fellow, Noel was my fellowship director, and Mel was one of the attendings. Both of them have since moved up in the world of PEM, and I'm excited to have them both today to speak about the training of pediatric emergency medicine, past, present, and maybe future. Welcome, Noel and Mel. Thank you very, very much for coming on the show. I know for a fact that you guys are both very busy individuals, so I appreciate your time. Let me just introduce you to the listeners. Noel is originally from Chicago. She went to med school at Northwestern University, followed by residency in Chicago in general pediatrics at Lurie Children's Hospital, and pediatric emergency medicine fellowship in the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, where I did my fellowship. After fellowship, Noel stayed as faculty and later even served as the PEM fellowship director. She was actually my director for the 3 years that I was there. She recently passed the torch to Mel, who's also on the call with us, and currently serves as the Vice Chair of Education in the Department of Pediatric at CHP. Mel was born in New Jersey, but grew up most of her childhood in the Dominican Republic, where her parents are from. She went to medical school at Columbia University, followed by pediatric residency at CHP, and PEM fellowship later on at the Children's National in DC. Did I miss anything? Any details?
No, not for me. This is Mel.
So Mel's amazing.
You're both amazing. So Mel was faculty for me when I was there at CHP, and Noel was my fellowship director. I've said on the show many times, I was super lucky and super grateful to have gotten such a great education. So I really, really appreciate you both being here. Both of you were very influential in my career, and it's true honor to have you. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yaron.
And my first question to you both, and it's a question that I ask all my guests, and this specific question is even more meaningful for you guys or for me to ask you guys, simply because you guys are in the business of producing and creating and educating PEM physicians. So the question is, what is your ideal PEM physician? One who does what, or one who is what? Noel, why don't you go first?
I think the biggest asset is someone who has a growth mindset. I'm going to jump off of something that Mel and I have talked about before, but being able to look at the feedback that you're getting both from the patients themselves as well as the faculty that are training you, and take that feedback and make it so that you're improving your skills and your knowledge and looking at it as a positive and not critical, not that it's being critical of your skills and knowledge, but that it's helping to guide you to grow and learn, I think is critical. Those are the fellows I love to train the most, and I think become the best physicians in the emergency department. We're faced with such uncertainty all the time that I think it's really critical that you don't ever feel like you know everything, and that you're always open to learning more about diseases. Look at like COVID that came out of the blue, right? And about different ways to approach old diseases as well. So that's probably, I think, the biggest ideal feature of a physician in general. But for pediatric emergency medicine, I think that's key.
All right. Thank you. Mel, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of what Noel said, because this is often a question that we get, in particular during recruitment. You know, sometimes applicants might ask, like, what are you looking for in somebody who's going to be your fellow? And so I usually tell them that the 3 words that I think about are growth mindset, like Noel said, and also conscientiousness and vulnerability. And so, I think over, now a decade being a PEM physician, sort of getting a lot of growth as an individual and as a professional, you realize that so much of the work that we do is really sort of in this realm of its uncertainty. And we're usually making decisions with families with limited information. So being able to have that intellectual humility that usually comes with, being vulnerable, understanding what your limitations are, recognizing that you need help, that we're not an island as physicians, and that takes the whole healthcare team to take care of children's and their family. That's really crucial. And then, like Noel said, having that growth mindset, which helps us to be lifelong learners. And I always sort of talk to our fellows about usually learning hurts a little bit. It's a little uncomfortable. So just always being comfortable being on that uncomfortable learning edge. So people that are willing to do that, sort of willing to be in that space.
Very nice. Oh, I completely agree with both comments. And it goes back to, I guess, what I learned from you guys, maybe subconsciously, but I tell my residents, residency and fellowship and training is not about being great, it's about getting better. So whatever your starting point was, you just need to get better by reading, seeing more patients, learning, etc. So I agree with that. Thank you. And one of my rules that I think I also learned somewhere at CHP is good feedback is best served warm. So best to give your trainees feedback at the very end of the shift when everything is sort of fresh in their mind, as opposed to a week or two later when nobody remembers anything because all the patients are kind of jumbled in your head. So no, those are really, really good comments. I appreciate that. My second question to you guys, and again, this is a really good opportunity because you guys are both either currently or previously training PEM residents or PEM fellows, to be attendings. How is training in PEM has changed over the years? So Noel, you were a PEM fellowship director until a year or two ago. Is that right?
2020. Yeah.
2020. Yeah.
And 2004 to 2020.
And Mel is currently in the role.
I'm a baby PD right now.
Say it again.
I'm a baby PD right now.
Baby PD. That's great. I love that. That's hilarious. So how do you think the education and training in PEM has changed over the years, and when do you see it's going?
Do you want to take this one, Mel, or do you want me to start?
Yeah, no, I'll go first. I would say probably the thing that I feel is most different, even from when I started fellowship in 2010, is POCUS. So I remember we had just one faculty where I did fellowship who was, had just was in the midst of, I think, completing her fellowship. And she was starting to sort of integrate it into our program as fellows. And, we did just a little tiny bit. I think there was one fellow, I did residency here in Pittsburgh in pediatrics. There was one fellow that was kind of using it a little bit here and there, Carrie Caparel, who's now in Louisville. And so it was just starting. And I think just the arc of that, we're really kind of like at the zenith of POCUS right now. And I'm really amazed at the skills that our fellows in particular kind of amass during their training and how they're, able to use it to diagnose patients right at the bedside. We have a weekly POCUS review where, just the way that it expedites care is really impressive for certain diagnoses. And I think the other thing that's been cool to watch is in terms of our evidence base and how that has changed in our subspecialty for PEM. The fact that we have this really robust literature. I think PCARN is probably the best example with the TBI rule and now the febrile neonate rule. So we have, I feel a lot of times working with our EM residents, they have so much evidence base to care for their patients, like the hard score, all of these different scores that they can use clinically, PERC rule, all of these things. And a lot of times, they come to the pediatric side and it's a lot of practice variation, a lot of kind of what individual physicians do. And it's really nice to be able to kind of talk about evidence base using these different types of decision rules that we have now that are very robust. So that's been really cool to see.
Mel, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with both of those. I think along the way, it was there during my fellowship training, but just has evolved is simulation. We've just incorporated it into, and we keep it enhancing the quality of the sim that we provide for fellows. And I know that's done nationally too, just in two studies that we looked at nationally. The fellows experience is pretty much universal now. But the way that we bring the simulators into our trauma bays and do like really high fidelity simulation we call it like in situ in the room that we're doing the Sims, we really learn a lot about team dynamics with our own team, about situational advances that we can do. Quality improvement happens during these when we realize, certain system changes could be made to improve patient care during these sessions. And what they've always done, and I think they continue to do, is there are situations, injuries, illnesses that are rare. And, you're at the mercy of what comes in during your shifts for what you're going to experience as a trainee and even as an attending. And I think having a sim curriculum where we're exposing the fellows to rare things that they might not see, drowning, lightning, adult arrest in pediatrics, for example, as, ways that they can at least practice that and rehearse that process with colleagues. So it's not the first time they're ever experiencing that if they happen to have the rare event occur during their career. So, and I think it also plays on the growth mindset too, because we're teaching them in a safe environment where we're wanting them to be vulnerable, as Mel put it, to learning and sharing that in front of their colleagues. So I think it sets a good example for working with each other in that way and building their confidence, because we, want them to, along with the growth mindset, you can be confident. They're not mutually exclusive. It's knowing what you know and knowing how to ask for the resources that you need.
Yeah, that's great. I totally agree. I remember specifically SIM being a very important part of my education for the reasons you mentioned. Most of the time we see a lot of the same, and it's the rare stuff are usually serious etiologies and serious presentations and critical kids. So it's kind of nice to have that experience with a good SIM lab and a good SIM curriculum, so you feel comfortable for the real thing. So I agree with that, and I remember that being part of my very significant part of my education. Now the other question I wanted to ask you guys, and I'm sure you guys know, many of the kids, or probably most kids in the United States, are seen in general emergency departments. So there's an attending there who trained in general emergency medicine, or maybe an APP, being a PA or a nurse practitioner who does general emergency medicine. And they see kids, but they see kids a minority of the time. Many of my listeners are ED physicians who, again, treat kids just some of the time, not full time like us. And my question is, as PEM educators and PEM attendings, what do you think are the most important advice you have for general ED physicians or trainees with regards to managing pediatric patients in their ED settings? Mel, why don't you go first? What do you think?
So I think probably the thing that I've learned the most, has been most helpful, is shared decision making, and that's key. Because I think a common pitfall for me, when I was probably a resident, early fellow, maybe even early attending, was, kind of going into the room and kind of saying like, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, feeling like my job was to, just give a plan. And a common pitfall that I sometimes hear from our EM residents is, always just residents in general sometimes, and sometimes just us as well, is this thought of like, well, the parents just want X, Y, or Z. And so what's really helped me is reframing that and really thinking of how to partner with the parents and really get a sense of what their concerns are. So 2 questions that have helped me a lot have been, asking the parents, what are your thoughts? What are you most concerned about? How can we help address your concerns? And asking those questions have just been really helpful. In one, I think just communicating respect, for their perspective, and that it's valuable and that it's important to get it. And also oftentimes really provides kind of the guideposts for patient-centered and really kind of holistic care in that moment. And sometimes that might mean you do something that you feel maybe is not as evidence-based, but oftentimes you might be surprised and find that what the parent really wants is reassurance and, not a bunch of diagnostic tests. So that has been something that's really helped me a lot during my career, is sort of asking those really key questions, and usually phrasing whatever my plan is as recommendations. Because I think oftentimes there's there can be a lot of absolutism, especially as you gain more knowledge and experience. We can start to think that what we do is always sound and always right. And I have found that by just saying like, this is the plan that I recommend, these are kind of the next steps that I think make sense for your kids' care, I think helps to leave the door open for the parents to then, be able to assess that, as opposed to, this is what we're going to do, making it seem like the parents don't necessarily have a say in what's going on. And then I think in particular, I did a rotation fellowship where we did rotate through a community ED, and it was actually a really great experience. And one of the things that was very common was it was still one of those places where the pediatricians would actually admit their patients to the hospitalist floor, and so I would do a lot of phone calls to pediatricians in terms of asking them about their kid who's in the ED, figuring out kind of follow-up care. Do they want to admit this kid? And so that's something that I still do now. So really partnering with the pediatricians as well when you're seeing kids. And if something's not clear, something's confusing, just reaching out to those, that person who's the medical home for the patient, that know them well, is, pays dividends. It feels like maybe it takes a lot of time in the moment to make a phone call, but oftentimes it really, again, I think just provides a really holistic care. So really, really using the patient's resources, their pediatrician, the people that know them best, and kind of really chatting with them, I think I have found really helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I was thinking about the last thing that you talked about, connecting with the pediatrician as you were talking, Mel, because I think I don't think we do that enough. And my experience came from being a primary care physician for a couple of years in between residency and fellowship, and how important it is to connect and how useful that is for the parents. I think that handoff is huge. And I think especially in the community, and I think it's something that could be used even in our academic centers a little bit more as well. I think also making along the lines of what Mel said, but in discharge planning, really along with the shared decision making, making sure that they're comfortable with the plan. I often will ask, to the parents, are you comfortable with this plan? Because it allows them to say what they're not, comfortable about. And in addition to that, asking what other questions do they have instead of do you have any questions, makes them feel also open to asking more. I think one of the things that's important is to make sure that as they leave, they feel empowered to reach out to the pediatrician, to come back 3 hours later if something changes that we didn't anticipate. So I think that is a key thing that we do, not just diagnosing, but prognosing and helping them, empowering them to be open to and what's going to happen and what we would expect to happen with the disease process.
One of the rules that I have in my head is I try to always ask, what questions do you have, at least 3 times before I leave the room, to really make sure, because sometimes when you ask the first time, parents may not necessarily be able to verbalize something right away. So I try to at least ask it like 3 times.
So I guess you'll both be very happy to hear that dozens, maybe hundreds of trainees in Florida have learned the same, because that's what I teach them. And that's what I learned from you guys. And I remember, Noel, specifically learning that from you, ending the discussion with, what questions do you have? Like, expect some questions, encourage some questions. So I totally agree with that. So your teaching and your philosophy has gone beyond Pittsburgh, just so you know. And I agree with all those comments. The other thing that I would add that I often do is when I have a child that I know has a URI, no big deal, and the kid is fine, but I can see that my anticipatory guidance is just not working, and mom is still, or dad still looks worried. What I tell the residents, and it's one of my rules, pinpoint the concern. So, mom and dad, was there something specific you were worried about? And then they say pneumonia, and then you get a chest x-ray and you make sure there's no pneumonia, even though you didn't think the chest x-ray was needed, there was no evidence for it, etc. But if the parents need a chest x-ray for their reassurance, I think that's fine to do. Worried parents don't go home. It's one of our rules. So no, those are really great comments that I think our general practitioners will appreciate. One more question, and I got to be honest, it's the most interesting question to me. And you guys know a little bit about the podcast. It's called PEM Rules because it's full of rules. And rule number one, it's not the patient's job to prove that they're sick. It's your job to prove that they're not. I learned that from Dr. Saladino, who I know you know, who's the inspiration behind the podcast. And I was wondering, do any of you have any specific rule that you follow, that you like, that you've learned and want to share with us?
Go ahead, Noel.
I have a couple that come to mind. One is I like the 3 strikes you're out rule. I think I learned that in residency from Sally Reynolds, if anyone listens, that knows Sally. Shout out to Sally. I think that either when the patient comes back, either to the ED 3 times or it's their 3rd visit, whether it's the pediatrician, urgent care, to ask yourself, are we missing something? Or are they not able to cope with what's going on? And really, that's a critical juncture to think about, next steps, whether you're, have a low threshold for doing more, potentially admitting, often admitting in that scenario, because there's something should raise your eyebrows in that situation for sure.
Mel, what about you?
Oh, I don't think I have any pithy rules that I've come up with, like Rick Saladino. But I do feel like something that I say very often is go with your gut first, and then take 2 steps back and, think of the big bad scary or think of other things that you should be considering. Because one thing that I do notice with a lot of residents and students is sometimes there can be a little bit of swirling of trying to think of all the possibilities right off the bat, or sometimes just really sort of thinking about the big bad scary, nothing else. And maybe that doesn't quite sort of fit with the presentation. So oftentimes I'll tell a lot of residents, just go with your gut. Kind of yeah, I think this kid has a virus. I don't think that there's anything else worrisome going on. And I'm perfect. Now I want you to take 2 steps back and, give me 5 other diagnoses that you think you should think about, just to help in the prioritization of the differential. So I feel like that's something I usually say prompt for a lot.
All right.
That's Mel's fast and slow thinking, huh?
Yes, exactly.
She's perfect.
Disciple.
Also, the way I relate it to the residents, and I guess it's just along the same line, I tell them to think about the most likely scenario, bronchiolitis, or the worst case scenario, congenital heart disease. This kid is wheezing because of congenital heart disease. So I think that's kind of along the same line. I also heard you saying, Mel, and I guess I'm going to, with your permission, add it to my rules, is make a recommendation as opposed to tell the parents what's going to happen today. Yeah, so those are great comments. Thank you both very much for coming on the show. I have a little habit that I do, or a custom that I try to do in the show, is dedicate the outro or make the outro a request by the people I interviewed, and I failed to ask you what music you like and what you want to hear. I imagine you both like Queen and Freddie Mercury.
Oh yeah,
both like who?
Queen, Freddie Mercury.
Yes, that's a good choice.
So how about Another One Bites the Dust for an outro? It's kind of for pediatric emergency medicine, but it's a great song.
No, it is perfect for PEM.
All right, so we're going to work on Another One Bites the Dust. It's a great baseline. And again, thank you guys very much for coming on the show. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Yaron, for the opportunity.
Thanks, Yaron. This was wonderful.
Thank you. And that is it for today, guys. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned from Mel and Noel, 2 instrumental people in my education. I hope you check out PEM Rules, subscribe to the newsletter, and check out the website. And of course, any feedback is welcome. This is Another One Bites the Dust.